Futures is a timely research topic. Are co-organizers. Now, the organizer of this conference will give their welcome to all the audience. Firstly, let's welcome the Vice Principal of Tsinghua University, Yang Bin, who made a video to convey his welcome.
尊敬的各位专家学者、老师们、同学们、朋友们，大家好！感谢美国卡内基梅隆大学设计学院和意大利米兰理工大学设计学院与清华大学一起联合举办本次设计未来国际会议，为各位提供交流平台，围绕设计未来，探讨前沿学术思路，并分享跨界创新实践。欢迎各位。习近平主席指出，世界发展老师们、同学们、朋友们，大家好！感谢美国卡内基梅隆大学设计学院和意大利米兰理工大学设计学院与清华大学一起联合举办本次设计未来国际会议，为各位提供交流平台，新机与变局中开新局。察事者智，遇事者赢，以超前的眼光规划未来，在时代的浪潮中砥砺前行，这是历史赋予高等教育的责任与使命。此次会议正是希望从学术的角度寻求解决方案，促进科技与经济社会协同共生、协同发展，将未来思维融入创新实践，以应对和引领充满不确定性的未来。清华大学关注前沿科研学术领域的发展，致力于为国内外教育科研人文领域的合作与交流搭建战略性平台，并融合艺术、科技、文化创新的力量，探索未来历史变革的趋势，为全球可持续发展做出贡献。此次大会从未来探索、未来学说、未来赋能和未来趋势4个维度，共同探索未来思维与设计思维的融合。未来探索从思辨、韧性、共益3个角度展开，探索如何在新常态下塑造未来社会文化。未来学说从方法、工具、教育3个类别细化，探讨将未来思维融入设计方法与教育模式的可能性。未来赋能从科技、产业、生态3个领域深入，探究多层次视角下的产业与创新发展的方向。未来趋势从城市、场景、服务3个关键词入手，探寻未来生活场景实验与智慧社会实践的潜力。未来以来，今天来自世界各地的专家学者云端相聚，交流前沿学术成果，探讨跨界创新实践，是高等教育为全球可持续发展做出的一项非常有价值、有意义的举措。希望此次大会可以吸引更多创新力量加入设计未来这一前沿对话，携手应对风险挑战，共建美好地球家园。谢谢大家。
Okay, thanks to Professor Yang. Next, the director of China-Italy Design Innovation Hub will give the welcome speech. Let's welcome Professor Li Jinliang.
Thank you, 社青。尊敬的各位专家朋友们，大家好。刚才杨校长已经欢迎过大家哈。由清华大学主办，中艺设计创新基地承办，卡内基梅隆大学设计学院 米兰理工大学设计学院联合举办的设计未来线上国际会议今天开始启动。本次会议将持续2个周末。承办方中艺设计创新基地是清华大学在欧洲设立的教育科研基地，是中艺2国开展设计创新合作的综合性平台。中艺设计创新基地整合中外优势教学科研资源，培养具备全球胜任力的创新设计领军人才，致力于促进中国工业设计创新发展，建设具有全球影响力的设计创新中心，也实现从中国制造到中国创造的突破，促进中艺及中欧教育科研和文化交流，服务国家“一带一路”倡议。新冠疫情给人类带来了前所未有的挑战，也让我们更深刻地认识到对话、协作与交流的重要性，分享创新理念，共享创新方法，积极探索远景目标作为行动指南，这样才能够提升我们应对全球挑战的能力。本次会议以实际行动做出积极回应，围绕设计未来的主题，与会者将探讨未来研究和思辨设计对创新思维的启发，短期未来与长期未来对创新趋势的影响，未来思维与设计思维对创新实践的推动，为海内外设计与领域的专家学者提供一个探索学科前沿领域、交流未来变革方向的合作平台。非常感谢会议的联合学术主席卡内基梅隆大学教授 Peter Scoopeley、 米兰理工大学教授 Anna Barbara 和清华大学教授傅志勇的组织，让来自国内外著名机构的24位学者专家共聚云端，分享精彩见解。11月7日和14日，与会专家将从未来探索、新常态下塑造未来社会文化、未来学说，将未来思维融入设计方法、未来趋势、未来生活场景实验与智慧社会实践和未来赋能多层次视角下产业与创新趋势这4个主题开展分享和研讨。11月8日和15日，会议将举办4场在线未来创想实验室，邀请嘉宾分享与引导互动的模式，围绕思辨未来、未来教育、未来传达、未来城市，邀请20位青年学者与大家在云端进行交流和对话，通过头脑风暴和创意激发，达成更广泛的共识，促进更有价值的行动。即将发布的2020服务设计蓝皮书和创新新基建概念视频将分别展现清华大学在服务设计领域的研究成果和对设计驱动创新模式的深入探索。本次会议将进行公开直播，特别感谢各媒体平台的支持，期待在交流和互动中，我们创造出跨界创新理念的新火花，发展设计未来的方法，并以远见引领实践，共同创造合意的未来。谢谢大家。
Thank you, Professor Li. As Professor Li said that this conference will last 4 days. Today, we will have 4 keynotes and 2 panels in English and Chinese both. And tomorrow, we will have 2 other lives on morning and afternoon in Chinese. And on November 14th, we will have 4 keynotes and 2 panels also in English and Chinese. And on November 5th, we will have 2 idea labs. So welcome the audience to watch all of our schedule. Okay, now let's welcome the keynote speech, Cai Jun. Give us a keynote. Welcome, Professor Cai.
好的，我视频开了，能看见吗？
Okay, yes, I can see you.
好的，大家好，非常高兴啊，这个作为第一个设计未来的演讲人哈，也很感谢清华中艺这个设计创新孵化基地，还有咱们清华大学哈这个一系列主办方来主持这个活动啊，这是一个非常重要的会议，我想今天因为大家在线上哈，国内外都有很多参与者来参加这个会议，在这个时刻，就像刚才杨校长讲到的，我认为也是一个非常重要的时刻。那么下面呢，我想就尽快的切入正题，我和大家开始来分享我要演讲的内容啊。稍微等一下，不好意思，稍微等一下，调到第一个。好的 ，OK， 大家都能看到吧？
可以的，可以的。
好的，那我就开始了哈。好，我先把这个开到旁边啊。好，非常高兴哈，跟大家有这个机会来来沟通和分享我对未来的未来设计的这样一个设计未来的会议的一个演讲。那么我今天的因为考虑到咱们是面向国内的大多数的听众，所以呢，我的演讲呢主要是以中文为主，因为我们有同声传译，所以我希望国外的朋友呢可以听这个同声传译的内容啊。OK， 那么我今天的演讲的内容是Design for Challenge of the Future，为未来社会的挑战而设计啊，这是我的演讲题目。稍等啊，我这个想调一下。不好意思，我调一下这个。好。那我的演讲题目是 Design for Challenge of the Future Society 哈，为未来社会的挑战而设计。我想在这个当下哈，这个当口，我们今天来探讨未来这样一个话题和设计未来这个话题是非常非常重要的啊。那么正如刚才杨校长也讲到的啊。那么我们今年正在面临一个巨大的一个变化哈，我想大家所有的无论是在线上还是在线下，在国内还是在国外的所有的人，那么我们今年都在经历一个2020年在经历一个巨大的一个变革时期啊。这个变革有很多内容有很多情况是因为过去的经济、科技、社会很多方向的这个能量的聚集已经呈现了一种山雨欲来风满楼的一个状态。那么今天这个2020年的疫情呢，这个新冠病毒呢，它突然加速了这样一个冲击和状态，这样一个黑天鹅的出现是大家前面都没有料到的。那么这也就是说，2020我们曾经也有这么一句话叫做“百年未有之大变局”那么我想这样一个大变局，也可能是我们在当20世纪初期的西班牙的这个 病毒大流行1战、2战啊，第一次世界大战、第二次世界大战。那么到今天，新冠病毒可能是对全人类在2战以后影响最大的一次这个重大的变化啊，所以在这个时期，我们正在站在一个路口啊，一个十字路口，我们在看到过去和受到过去的冲击，和同时我们又在面临一个未来的一个巨大变革的冲击。那么大家可以看一下最近约翰霍普金斯大学公布的这个全球的新冠病毒感染人数，现在已经达到了4600多万，当然这是上一周的数据。那么这几天的数据，这一周数据又在不断的往上攀升，那么死亡人数也接近120多万啊，这个是一个非常迅速的一个在变化的一个数据这对我们的威胁，对全人类的威胁是非常巨大的。那么新冠病毒所造成的疫情造成的影响，那么从中国到全球来说都是有目共睹的从2月份我们武汉的封城到后面在全世界这个新冠病毒的肆虐它造成了这个旅行、通航、经济、商业这个金融产业全球性的一个打击和一个危机这是大家都深有体会。我们看到全球的人都在这样的一个情况下面临了一个状态，就是说城市封闭那么第二波疫情现在在欧洲和美国又出现了，而且很厉害那么法国西班牙、英国都在采取第二波封城的措施。那么很多人们的这个工作生活都受到巨大的一个冲击。那么另外一个呢，就是全球除了疫情之外，全球的生态环境现在也在面临一个巨大的一个冲击状态。比如说在今年的夏天今年我们就看见，通过卫星图像看见南极的2个重要冰川在最脆弱的地方遭到了一个快速的崩塌，那么重要的这个冰架破裂了。这个研究这个海洋学家还有生态学家在发出警告说，它将对海平面的上升产生很重大的一个影响。那么右边这个大家看到是澳大利亚的森林大火，去年的森林大火和今年在美国加州也出现了森林大火，它的影响在澳大利亚的这个森林大火达到了4600万英亩这个地域的这个面积呢，相当于是一个叙利亚的这样一个国家的面积这个森林大火已经造成很大的威胁很多动物和植物都受到了威胁和伤害这个是人类一个巨大的一个现在面临的一个自然的出现的巨大的危机和挑战。那么除了我们说这个生态环境正在出现恶化之外，那么我们看到在人工环境方面天上地下也在出现非常重要的一些影响和变化。比如说大家也都知道，在日本的福岛，这个2011年福岛地震之后由于这个核反应堆这个核电站的需要冷却受到破坏以后需要冷却，相当于有123万吨的水用来进行冷却那么这些水都含有大量的核放射性的同位素物质还有其他的放射性物质。那么现在这个123万吨水呢，现在是一直存在这个福岛这个地方因为日本说这些水呢实在是没有地方要放了它要那么现在有不同的方案，最终一个方案呢现在提出来说要排到海里边。但是大家也看到这个问题，如果排到海里边的话，这个专家认为说30年当一个研究说30年是才会得到稀释和释放那么另外的很多专家认为这个是不可能的，因为排到海洋里边的水会对海洋生物造成巨大的一个危害。那么未来这些 核放射性的元素是很难清理的。那么另外一个，我们看到右边是埃隆·马斯克提出的星链计划，这个呢，他计划是要释放将近4万颗卫星在打造一个全球星链。当然一方面可能是对全球的网络连接是一个巨大的一个科技的进步和变化和创新。那么另外一个问题就是带来了大量的太空垃圾这个太空垃圾的评估我们现在还不太清楚，所以从天上到地下我们今天都在面临巨大的一个威胁那么另外一个就是核威胁我这儿查到一个资料，就是一群科学家还包括核科学家他们构建了一个叫做世界末日的一个时间表。那么从他们的这个网上来看，他提出来说2020年是非常危险的，由于这个核战争的这么一个可能的这么一个威胁性。那么他们提出来说大概现在距离最终的爆发还有100秒的时间当然这是一个比较夸张的描述但是我们从这几年的情况来看这个地球上的这个核力量的冲击在尤其是超级大国的这个核威胁这个是已经是对全人类实际上是有一个很重要的一个威胁性的一个状态那么这个世界正在变得越来越不平静由于新冠疫情之后所有的矛盾和焦点看似都在冲突和爆发我们人类到今天已经走过了自工业革命以来走过了300多年的历程。我们从福特的 T 型车塑造的大工业时代到苹果 IBM 开创的信息时代到这个航天阿波罗登月这样的航天的时代，到今天我们正在要进入和马上就已经进入的这个5G 的时代我们整个人类社会正在发生一个天翻地覆的巨大的变化。那么非常有意思去设想我们昨天设想的未来是不是就是今天呢？其实在这个历史过程中间，我们人类的历史社会中间其实一直的不断的再去设想明天会怎么样那么我们看到是昨天人们设想的，其实在我们的今天很有意思，其实是有些是非常相似的比如说在1962年这个意大利的插图画家沃尔特·莫里诺他设计了这样一个叫 Signaletta 这么一个在 Segway 和 Smart 之间的单座汽车今年在社交媒体上有人把这个报道翻出来以后，发现这个车的设计的当时的设想非常类似我们今天在新冠病毒的疫情下要求隔离的一个状态有一种惊人的这种相似的一种氛围我不知道大家知不知道叫这个 Bruce Michael 他是美国非常著名的纽约客这个杂志的插图画家在很多年他一直是为纽约客这个杂志做插图但是我们发现在他的60、70年代的插图中间，他已经大量的在描述类似这个无人驾驶的一个状态我们看到这样的状态是人们在这个汽车上有屏幕在操作这种电脑等等这个是大概是70年代左右的一些插图这个 Bruce Michael 的这个插图还蛮有意思，我们看到像这几幅插图的话，它也表现了人们在操作汽车中间在跟电子屏幕这样的一个车厢里边所产生的各种娱乐活动和状态这个和我们今天在谈论的自动驾驶和信息交互在汽车中间的这种作用和情景是非常相似的那么那是昨天的人在设想今天，那我们今天的人是否设想的未来就是明天呢？那也是我们非常值得去思考的 在 Art Center 就是这个洛杉矶的艺术设计艺术中心设计学院啊，也曾经有一位很著名的教授叫 Sid Madden，他在他的毕生的这个教学中间啊，他一直在设想人类的未来状态是怎么样。所以在他非常有名的一些创作中间，他也以这样的一个方式去演绎了人类的未来的交通工具啊。这个作品呢，大概是80到90年代的作品啊，80年代左右的啊。那么我们今天看到其中有一些类似这样的一个对未来现实憧憬的这样的一些思考和想象，变成了今天的现实。比如说在迪拜，我们就已经看见了这样的一个可以飞行的出租无人飞机无人驾驶飞机这个已经在网上我们已经能够看到了这就是非常近似的一个状态。那么我们也看到了，在过去10几年中，有很多人在国内外的很多人在设想未来机器和人的关系是什么我们看到很有意思的这些插图都在描述人在塑造一些未来的人类机器人机器人为人在提供服务。那么这样的状态，我们今天其实在我们的生活中间已经发生了。比如说左边这个叫利米克拉这是一个虚拟人。那么我们大家也都知道了，这个虚拟人现在很火。那么在国内，我们新的这个小冰等等也出现了微软也在打造小冰这样的虚拟人。那么右边是这个 Sophia 大家都知道这是第一个类人型的一个机器人它可以说话发表意见等等等等这就是我们今天所在面临的一个机器AI 人工智能正在改变人们生活状态，逐渐对不管是虚拟的人还是机器表述的这样一个类似真人的人在跟我们今天在逐步的侵入我们的生活和世界，在跟我们对话。那大家也知道，埃隆·马斯克最近前段时间他已经提出了这个已经进行了这个脑植入的实验用脑电波的这种方式的植入芯片来操纵对人们的操纵和意识上的一个判断那这样的东西在未来的10年未来的几十年是非常可能发生的。很多事情是我们实际上是已经开始在感受到，当这样的方式呢，可能首先会对我们说的很多病人比如帕金森等等这些患者们可能开始产生治疗的作用和效果，但是呢也会对人类的意识以这个 AI 人工智能的方式去进行操纵这个也会有一个另外的一层，就是可能会带来的一些危险性。那么我们看到今天无论是从无人驾驶到数字货币到 AI 与人工智能这个网上支付、智能制造到人造肉人造食物到这个 AR、VR 这个增强现实、虚拟现实和相对的很多很多这样的产生的这个商业模式也好这个人们的生活方式的变化也好整个这样一个巨大的一个变革时代正在朝我们走来。我们其实已经在这个人们已经身处其中了那这个就带来一个巨大的一个挑战和问题。在一个未来，就是我们在人和自然的关系中间，我们今天已经在人造世界和自然世界之间已经产生了巨大的矛盾和冲突和挑战。那么我们现在又有一个新的物种进来，那就是 AI， 就是人创造的一个机器，它和人之间会产生一个什么样的关系？而在整个关系又影响到我们从产业、经济、生活、金融到整个社会发展。那么在这样一个状态中间，未来人和机器之间的关系是什么？我们是人和数字的关系是什么？这需要我们去深度的思考。那么我们想问一个问题，就是那未来是可以预测的吗？因为我们看到有很多像现在的黑天鹅、灰犀牛还有很多 事情是我们好像无法预测的，但是也有很多是一个似乎是这个必然发生的这样一个状态的产生。那未来是否可以预测吗？那么这些年呢，我们在清华大学设计管理研究所在做了很多这方面的一些尝试，比如说我们每天在收集信息，在追踪这些信息，在看它对社会的经济、政治、科技、文化和人们的生活在产生什么样的一些变化。每一年这些变化下来，它会产生的一些要素是什么？它如何形成一些归纳成一些可能发展的一些具有前瞻影响的东西然后再把它进行提取我们在做这样的一些工作那么另外呢，我们也看到很多学者们很多这个专家学者们他们在进行一些研究比如说从像这个叫做Great Transition 这是一个国际的设计研究的机构他们正在研究的，它是从不同的驱动力的角度来看这个近期的驱动力和中级的驱动力的角度去分析，通过价值需求知识创新这个权力的结构和文化方面的影响来对应的和在人口、经济、科技和政府治理等等各个方面来看这些影响是怎样的一个产生的一个状态不好意思，这上面好像有点挡着，那就这样那么另外呢，就是通过这样的一些方式呢，我们也看到在它追踪了一些6个指标这个6个指标包括了这个和平、自由、发展、气候生态环境水资源这个人口、经济和国际的全球平等，然后它会从市场政策和等等这些变化的指数去跟踪这个每20年它的重大的变化是什么那么我们实际上看到这个很多学者们，也就是这一次我们的设计未来的这个大会所邀请的很多学者们，也可能会在后面来分享我们如何去追踪研究或者说把握未来的这些指标，它是否可以预测，可以去用什么样的设计思维和方法去跟踪、去描述、去定义这个人类的未来方向，而反过来给我们今天和未来的发展能够提出一些非常重要的一个指引方向。在这个叫做 Telos Institute 这样一个组织中间这样一个研究未来的机构中间他提出了非常有意思的未来3个发展的思路的一个描述那么这3个思路呢，第一个就是作为我们看到这个图，就是中间的红线这是我们今天的一个状态。那么通过工业革命、农业革命、工业革命信息科技革命，我们发展到今天，但是我们现在面临未来的3种可能的走向。那么一种就是传统的世界，我们通过传统的治理的方法，我们还是延续传统的思维结构和产业和整个社会系统发展方式这是走向一个传统世界。那么另外一个中间，他说也可能会出现一个野蛮世界，由于人们对于这个未来在科技中间发生的各种冲突这个包括我们今天在国际上看到的新冠疫情下的很多问题和这种是否会产生一种倒退到一个野蛮世界，还是说我们会面向一个未来的一个彻底的变化，就是从生态环境、产业人文和社会出现一个巨大的一个正向的一个转型所以其实我认为这是一个很有意思的描述，就是这是未来人类社会所面临的一个3种不同的路径所以也需要我们每一个国家、每一个人、每一个这个企业、组织、机构去思考这个问题。那这样的话呢，我们涉及到是否需要去进行创新性的思维就刚才 这个前面杨校长也提到这个未来思维哈，这个未来思维在这儿是很重要的啊。所以，因为我们过去是延续了一个传统的工业化也好，信息化也好，后工业社会也好啊，这样一个社会，我们今天走到当下，或者我们正在面临一个未来的发展的时候，我们其实已经发现，我们过去的传统的思维结构和模式已经很可能不能够适应未来的挑战。那这样的话呢，我们是否要去塑造一个新的思维？那这个思维可能是不同于过去的线性的思维，也可能不只是一种结构化的、网络化的思维，也可能是一种生态性的思维。因为这样的思维是我们能够面对复杂社会挑战的一个非常重要的一个思维模式。所以，改变或者说塑造新的思维模式，是面向未来挑战非常重要的一个基础。在联合国发展目标提出来这个2030年的发展目标，其实是它描述了一个非常重要的一个蓝图。那么这个蓝图是通过了17个议程来表述的这17个议程包括消除贫穷、零饥饿、良好的健康和福祉、素质教育、性别平等、清洁的水卫生设施清洁能源。这个体面的劳动与经济增长、工业创新经济、基础设施减少不平等可持续社区、气候行动等等等等其实它描述一个非常重要的这样一个方式表述一个非常重要的一个方式和目标那这些目标对我们来说是非常重要的。那同时我们也看到在这个世界经济论坛这样一个议程上面，它不仅是对于当下和最热点的从国家到社会问题到经济问题到科技问题的各个栏目在呈现了需要关注问题之外，它还以这样的一个思维模式呈现出我们人类所面临的不同的问题的挑战和需要解决的因素，而这些因素呢，它是互相之间是紧密联系、紧密关联的。那这样就涉及到一个问题，就是说我们如何去塑造一个未来思维？因为我认为未来思维甚至它是在超越设计思维基础上的一个思维。我们现在在谈论设计思维，商学院谈论设计思维，设计学院和企业也都在谈论设计思维。但是设计思维它是聚焦于人聚焦于这是一个非常重要的，聚焦于用户那么但是呢仅仅有这个是不够的，因为我们今天面临的整个社会的复杂程度和系统程度远超于过去，所以我们可能要在设计思维的基础上去扩展这样一个思维，那就是说要去描述未来，要去增强未来的认识未来的方法论，要去构建洞察未来的方法论那么在这个基础上，首先是未来的思维，那么另外呢，就是需要构建像刚才我说的，构建一种洞察未来的方法论和工具构建一种思考，因为我们无法以传统的工业社会，甚至我们无法以完全的我们现在的一部分这个信息社会的一些思考去描述未来，因为这是一个未来的社会，有很多东西已经在极大的正在改变我们整个的系统，所以我们需要构建新的洞见性的方法和思考和工具去进行认识，我们才能够迎接未来的挑战。那么另外呢，对于在未来来说，这个人类、机器和自然这三者之间，其实我们正在面临越来越多的复杂化的问题。所以在这个中间，我们如何去构建一个未来的伦理因为我们过去是人与自然的关系，那么我们今天说人和自然之间出现了更为复杂的是这个机器的关系，尤其是人工智能对我们今天的人产生的很多问题这个关于隐私问题，我想这个数字隐私等等大家都在讨论这个问题就不说了，它实际上是构建了很多关于未来伦理的问题那么另外呢组织 这样的一个结构如何去适应未来，这也是对企业的挑战。我们今天的大公司，全球性的公司由于数字科技的变化，不管是阿里还是腾讯还是这个Apple 还有 Facebook 等等，那么这些大公司都在以这个数字集权的方式在垄断我们的很多很多这样的一个数字的一个占有。那么这样的话呢，实际上又面临了另外一个问题，就是说我们如何形成一个具备社会责任的一个组织架构这也是对这样的一个未来的组织企业所提出的一个挑战包括很多中新的企业，它如何去适应这个未来的发展。那么在这个基础上，我们如何去构建一个未来的知识结构这个知识结构肯定是不同于我们在工业时代、农业时代、工业时代的知识结构有些基础的东西可能是有类似的，但是有一些思维结构的一些核心的东西可能是在变化了所以比如说我们不能从单点思维的角度去思考问题，我们更多的需要从系统的角度去思考问题这些问题可能在这个整个社会变得更为复杂之后，我们越来越需要具备一种生态化的面对复杂思维的这样的一个复杂问题解决的一个思维结构和逻辑。那么同时呢，我们也需要构建这样的一个未来的知识体系。那在这个基础上，教育就变得越来越重要当然我这儿提到了设计的教育，我认为还包括其他的教育，就是我们现在的知识体系实际上是在过去的知识体系中间成长出来的，但是我们培养的人他又要面临未来的成长体系那么在这样一个矛盾中间，就是说他要把过去的知识体系学习消化，然后转换到对应未来的知识体系。那么在这个过程中间，又有一部分过去的知识体系要和未来的知识体系之间要产生冲突，它如何进行新的学习？所以这个过程中间，我们对教育的挑战是非常，我觉得是面临一个非常巨大的挑战那这个里边包括设计教育的挑战，其实都是完全是和过去有很大的一些变化的那所以从这些角度来说，我们今天其实是要塑造一种新的思维模式或者新的一个思路。那么在这个里边，设计我仍然认为它能够对未来的未来是可以通过设计去赋能的，因为设计本身它所涉及到的思考、它的工具、它的逻辑和它处理问题的整个过程，在这个过程中间实际上我们今天看到设计正在急速的一个扩展它涉及到了从产业到社会创新到生态到环境到金融到服务等等等等其中最为核心的就是说设计所具备的这样一个具有思维发展和思维发散和整合的这样一个能量。所以我认为我们今天通过设计去赋能去面向未来，可能是我们今天要做的一个非常重要的工作。那在最后呢，我给大家放一段视频这是在德国的乌梅尔这样一个城市。左边我们看到这是100年前建的一个悬挂式的轨道悬挂轨道。那么就像我们今天的地铁，但它是悬挂的这样一个轻轨。这是100年前建的，但是100年来这个轨道没有拆，仍然在运行。所以在右边我们看到是100年以后的汽车的状态这个带给我们的一个巨大的穿越感。那么我想结束我的讲座的意思是什么呢？我们在100年以后，人们怎么看我们的今天，就像我们现在看100年前的昨天一样那但是我们今天面临的挑战比100年前更加的复杂这就是我们要要在未来这样的一个主题上，我们要去开发研究和构建一个新的思维体系的一个非常重要的一个思考好，那我的演讲就到这儿那未来以来其实我们也可以看到我这个下面有一个二维码，实际上我们在做的一个微信公众号，也可以欢迎大家关注。 OK， 好，谢谢大家。OK， 好，我讲完了。
好的，蔡老师。Okay, thanks, Professor Tsai, for your impressive keynote. And now we are going to have the first panel of this conference, Panel 1, Future Exploration. This panel is moderated by Cheng Shuxin, who is the Director of Innovation Design of School of Design at Central Academy of Fine Arts. Let's welcome Dr. Chen to chair the panel.
好的，非常感谢夏老师。请问声音都 OK 吧？然后呢？可以的。好，谢谢夏老师。屏幕前的各位观众朋友们，大家好。那么首先的话呢，非常感谢来自母校的邀请，能够在2020年这样一个非常特殊的时期吧，今年通过这样线上联动的方式呢，和诸位专家学者们一起来探讨第一个论坛的板块，我们对于未来的探索到底该何去何从。然后我是来自中央美术学院设计学院的教师程舒心。然后呢，在过去几年的话呢，我们在央美的教学改革也一直在探索创新设计这样一个学科的方向，也是在探索未来到底我们的创新型的人才该如何培养。所以呢，像今年就是结合着社会文化和经济等等这些方面的一些变化，我们可能也是从设计未来的角度，对于未来的趋势的设计，还有科幻中的现实与想象等，也希望一直在探索的呢，就是人类社会可能面临的复杂的需求和可持续的创新解决方案到底会怎么样来做一个变动。所以呢，今天呢非常有幸作为第一场分论坛的主持人，然后呢，即将呢我们将要邀请3位来自不同领域的专家学者，分享他们角度对于未来探索的可能性。那么首先呢，我们想要邀请第一位来自南方科技大学人文科学中心的吴岩教授，他呢也是科学与人类想象力研究中心的主任。那么现在我们先把屏幕可以切到吴老师这边。可以请您这边来调试一下我们的这个 PPT， 我们可以先请吴老师开始，然后呢，观众朋友们有什么问题，非常欢迎大家积极的提出。
各位朋友，大家下午好，很高兴哈，能够，我怎么能够把我的屏幕调出来？共享，
对，下面的共享
desktop 应该是 desktop， 为什么要？应该就可以了吧？那个谁，你帮我看看。
现在
我想我先讲啊，很高兴和大家见面，因为也是刚才蔡老师说的，就是我们主要还是国内的听众，所以我就用中文，然后也有翻译。我呢是一个科幻作家，大概在过去的40多年时间里边呢，一直是从事科幻创作。那在这个过程中呢，我从1991年开始呢，当时在北京师范大学开设了科幻的课程。这样的话，后来我们的这个本科的课程逐渐变成了一个这个硕士课，后来变成一个博士课那么我们可能是唯一的从还要退出那我还要退出一下才行。
好的
对不起，
老师，您要用今天发给我的那个 PPT 吗？
对，您可以把它放出来吗？
好的，但是上面好像没有。
那您就给我放出来吧，我就直接用您的
但是上面只有图，是这个版本吗？
没有文字吗？一点文字没有
对，
我还是这样，我退一下，我马上回来。
您退一下好了。
好的抱歉。
没事。
这么退吧。
好的，那请观众我们稍微等一下，吴老师一会儿调整一下就进来。 我可以先跟大家预告一下吧。今天待会儿第一位呢是吴岩教授来给大家做分享，然后呢，我们今天的第二位分享者是来自米兰理工大学的教授乔凡纳，然后第三位呢是Bruce Sterling， 是一位未来学者和科幻作家。所以呢，我们今天呢大概先是这3位教授，然后第4位的话呢是来自米兰理工的 Mustafa。我们吴老师切过来了，吴老师，请您试一下。
好的，来共享一下屏幕，我的 PPT。
好，
可
以看到，您可以全屏一下。
好的，好，我想我今天想讲的题目就是科幻未来主义的彼岸之光。刚才已经讲过，我在过去40年里边一直在从事科幻创作，也从1991年开始呢，又从事科幻教学。到2017年呢，我离开原来工作的北师大，到深圳的南方科技大学，人文学院呢建立了科学与人类想象力研究中心。那我们这个中心呢，主要是做3件事情，一件事情呢就是做这个想象力的脑科学和心理学。主要想从一个基础的方面探索想象力相关的一些内容，这是第一个方面的工作。那第二个方面呢，我们主要是做通过想象力怎么去探索科学和社会的未来。在过去几年里，我们也跟腾讯公司、跟其他的一些单位合作，做过一些会议。第3个方面呢，就是我的老本行科幻作品的研发。那因为对科幻比较熟悉，所以我想今天呢，我就从科幻的角度来切入这个未来的问题。那我要讲的是这个科幻未来主义的一些问题。那么首先呢，我想讲就是从一件事情开始讲起。上个星期呢，我们请这个广州大学和中山大学的这个共同所拥有的老师，就翟振明教授呢，来给我们做了一次关于他所正在做的这个扩展现实的一个研究。他讲就是说，在他的实验室里，现在有一种15分钟的体验。这个体验呢，是你坐上一个高尔夫球车，戴上一个头盔。这个头盔呢，除了是内部视觉以外，就是完全虚拟视觉以外呢，还有这个外部图像能够进入到这个大脑。然后进入以后呢，就开始他这套体验。那在这个15分钟里边，他会反复穿越现实和虚拟，但是你无法分清这种穿越那么在这个过程中现实和所谓虚拟现实之间的关系被彻底的打破，而且你无从做出一个评判那所有这些工作呢，其实早在上个世纪90年代在这个翟老师在美国期间呢，他已经做了一些工作，所以其实现在就是通过技术来实现他的这些工作。所以现在大家看到的是他的那个书，英文的和中文的书，和他在我们这儿讲课的一个幻灯片。好，那么我想就借助他所做的这个工作呢，来谈谈科幻现实主义和科幻未来主义到底它是怎么分野的。那我自己认为呢，实际上有3种不同的现实我也是从这个翟老师的这儿获得一些启发那么第一种现实呢，我就把它叫做物理的现实，或者叫做粒子的现实。那么这就是在我们过去所生存的那个世界，我们所接触的吃穿用去工作去这个旅游，去探索自然去改造自然等等等等，这些过程里面我们所遇到的现实，这是所谓第一现实，是物理现实。那么第二现实呢，就是我们逐渐发展起来，信息技术发展起来以后呢，所建立的所谓的这个数码现实或者虚拟现实。那么这种现实呢，创建了另一种现实像头号玩家等等这些电影里边所展现的，就是或者说现在我们通过电子游戏所进入的这个世界，这是所谓第二现实。那么但是通过这种新的这个扩展现实也就是我把它叫做第3种现实翟老师把它叫做终极现实。那么这个第3种现实呢，就是那么通过这种扩展现实加上这个物联网加上 5G、6G 等等这个信息系统，那么把整个人置于一种和我们所说的物理现实、数码现实之间的无缝穿越。那这样就实现了一种两种不同的现实的统一，建立了这种新的现实。那这样的话，物理现实的世界的一系列的这个作用可以在数码现实里发生作用，但是反过来，数码现实或者虚拟现实第二现实里发生的一切也可以反作用于我们所谓的现实世界，或者叫做物理现实。那么这样的话，就这个3个现实系统无形中就给我们提出了一个新的分界线，就是所谓科幻现实主义和科幻未来主义之间的这个分界线。那么这个分界线在哪儿？就是在这个终极现实的这个位置上，其实已经给出了科幻现实主义和科幻未来主义的一个分界。那么谈到科幻现实主义和科幻未来主义呢，这是2个在中国还是具有一定影响力的创作的思想。那我想就简单的来谈谈这2种思想。那么大家可能都过去听说过所谓科幻现实主义。那么科幻现实主义呢，实际上真正的提出把它当成一种创作思想来提出，是20世纪70年代到80年代是最早提出来。那么后来近些年来呢，又有一些作家，比如最早是这个郑文光提出来，后来经过反复的来回来去的提，那最近一轮呢提到呢，最主要是陈秋帆等等这些包括韩松等等他们提出来。那么在中国，实际上如果你去关注这种科幻现实主义的创作实践，你会发现那它出现的更早并不是说从70年代才开始有现在我们所发现的中国科幻小说的诞生，那如果说从1902年梁启超开始提倡新小说开始在他新小说里边展现了有一种科学小说，如果从那时候开始，那么接着到1903年这个鲁迅先生，就是当时的周树人先生翻译这个凡尔纳Jules Verne 他的这个越界旅行，就是从地球到月球给他写了越界旅行变言从这时候开始呢，我觉得第一种科幻现实主义就已经出现了。那么鲁迅先生讲得很清楚，他说这个科幻作品是什么？他说就是叫做经以现实伪以人情，就是经现和伪现一个是对不起，经以科学，对不起，经以科学伪以人情。那么一方面是科学，一方面是人情，把它交织在一起，那么共同构成就是这个科幻作品。这是鲁迅先生。那么同时他在这个翻译这些作品的时候，他特别强调，就这些作品是干什么用的？最主要是要给中国人带来科学知识要让中国人熟悉科学知识。所以他的这个目标是一种现实改进的目标是作用于所有的创作是作用于现实的那这种以现实为目标，以改进现实为基础的这种创作，后来发生了很多比如说这个叶之善这个失踪的哥哥，比如说迟书昌是吧，大经牧场，比如说萧剑亨写一些，到后来叶永烈实际上它贯穿了整个过去的这个100年的时间里边，我们有大量的想要通过科幻作品来去提高中国人的科技水平进行科学知识普及的这种努力，这些努力我都把它归注在科幻现实主义的这个流派里边。那么这是第一种。那么接下来第2种所谓的科幻现实主义是在50年代，20世纪50年代，就新中国建国以后，当时由于受到这个前苏联的影响，就提出了一些在前苏联看来是很重要的科幻创作观念。这些观念就是说，科幻作品主要完成2件任务，一个任务就是要这个描写科学家脑子里的未来科学家他能实现的那些未来，这是第一个。第2个就是说要培养所谓新人一个新的时代诞生了，要培养所谓新人。那么在这个过程里就产生了一系列作品，包括郑文光自己写的作品像什么这个火星建设者共产主义畅想曲等等这些作品。那这些作品也包括后来最近这些年像王靖康老师这个刘慈欣老师等等，他们创作一系列作品。这一系列作品是以这个科技的未来 作为创作的一个基线其实它还是在改进现实的这么一种创作的一种模式，这是第二类。那么第三类就是80年代到现在当这个童恩正珊瑚岛上的死光的作者童恩正提出写了他的这个作品以后，他提出来就是科幻作品不能够局限在科学知识这么一件事情上，应该产生一些更广大的影响，应该对社会文化、对人的价值观等等产生更广大影响，这样就产生了新的所谓的科幻现实主义。那么这种科幻现实主义就是以科幻为基础，对现实的一种批判，是吧？一种对存在的一种反思那么这样的作品后来产生了很多，包括金涛韩松现在的郝景芳陈秋帆等等。但所有这些我都认为它是科幻现实主义创作。为什么呢？因为它是在第一现实和第二现实的这么一个状态下所创作的这么一种理念。那科幻未来主义是什么？那科幻未来主义我认为就是在处理第三种现实之下刚才我讲就是说，一旦这个现实是数码现实和粒子现实建立了统一性以后，那么数码现实的世界就可以反作用到粒子现实的世界，粒子现实世界和数码现实世界就是这种无缝的一种衔接以后那就是说不是说你单单你是在游戏世界，游戏世界的这个一切都可以作用在现实世界。其实这个在William Gibson 还有一会儿要讲的这个 Bruce Sterling 几位这个在作品里边已经发生这些。那么一旦处理到这些问题的时候，整个这个世界就彻底的改变了，就是人事实上是可以构筑他一切他想要构筑的东西。那么这样的话，其实在某种意义上人就已经取代了过去我们意义上的那种超人那种神。所以在这样的话就产生了这么一种状态，这种状态就是其实也就是我们现在所说的后人类状态也就产生了所谓的就是彼岸的问题那么在这样我们就开始有一种所谓的科幻未来主义这是2014年我在未来事务管理局上的一次发言，这个发言后来我把它总结出来写了一篇文章，叫做《科幻未来主义宣言》。那么这个宣言呢是在我的这本这个中国科幻沉思录里面后来是有。那这个宣言呢其实不用管它具体内容，它主要谈的就是说在这种新的互作的状态在第三现实的状态后人类的状态科幻的一种新的一种产生的方式大概有5点。第一点就是为未来写作，而不是为现实写作，就是要跳过现实去奔向未来这么一个。第二是感受是大于推理的。其实我倒反而不认为现在路径性的这种就是科技的发展这种按照路径的这种前进方式可以给我们一个，当然可以带着我们走向未来，但是更重要的是我们要通过自己的感受要产生一系列新的需求，一系列新的愿望，那么通过这些愿望来去探索未来的这个变化。这是第二个，感受大于推理。那这个其实跟今天的那个创作的这个因为我经常做创作培训班这些很多作者找我就是讲说，老师你再给我看看，我又做了一个大的构架，我现在世界构架简直就做的非常好。那我觉得这个还不够，是吧？还要对世界的不是说通过这个科学的原理去做世界的构架，而是通过亲身的感受探索未来。这是第二个。第三个就是寻找无边的思想和境界这就是无边性所谓的第四个，这是我一直就考虑最近一些年我们自己的作品，我觉得就是没有唤起的作品是不合适的，因为我们太多的那种对人没有唤起的作品，是吧？第五个就是最终这些科幻未来主义的目标是要去创造，是要去产生新的未来这样的一个基本的想法。这就是我所说的这个科幻未来主义。那么本着这样的一些想法呢，我们这些年呢也做了一些作品像我们中心里边像刘洋老师我自己还有包括外部的很多作家这个包括刚才讲刘慈欣这个王锦刚老师，当然他们不一定是说我受你影响，而是说我自然的就把他们纳入到我的这个思路里边来，还有包括这个江波等等 他们写的一系列作品，我觉得就很大程度上是一种未来主义的导向的这么一种作品。那么和现实主义之间可能是有两个不同的思路这是我自己的一些想法。那么接下来呢，我们也做其他，除了文字作品，这些年我们也跳出文字，也做一些其他方面的工作。比如说我们做那个展览，像去年的深港双城建筑这个双年展上边，我们有一个叫9座城市万种未来的这么一个作品。这个作品分成2部分，一部分它是一本书，这一本书在历史上它会永远的存在，还有一部分就是这个展区这个展区呢，请了9位艺术家，用9种不同的方式去展现9种跳跃之后的未来这是一个作品，是关于人机替换一场瘟疫以后，当人的心脏变成机器心脏以后这样的一种会发生些什么还有这个是陈秋帆的作品所做的这个Sheldon Brown 这个做的作品费俊老师也后边他们也会讲，所以我这里就不多谈了。这是一个完全是未来的声音的一个就大湾区的未来的一种声音的图像。好，那么还有一个我们自己的我也参与的作品。那所有的这些呢，我觉得就是我们这些年在南科大科学人类想象力研究中心所做的这个工作。非常期待大家能够到我们的这个中心来我愿意共同的跟大家讨论有关科学、艺术以及未来的问题谢谢大家。
好的，谢谢吴老师。那我们既然现在还有一点点时间，可否请问吴老师一个问题？刚才呢，您提到了非常吸引人的未来科幻主义，然后呢，所以呢，想请您聊一聊关于科幻未来主义的这个里面有没有一个具体的一个场景或者一个例子您愿意跟大家稍微具体分享一下？
我觉得刘慈欣的很多作品就其实它是那个超越性非常强的。你比如在《三体》的第3部里边，它有大量的这种和现实无关的已经在非常远的未来的生命的这种存在的形式，是吧？还有这个整个宇宙的存在形式，我觉得太多太多，整本书都是这样。还有像江波这些年他写一些关于宇宙探索以及关于这个机器人方面的一些故事。其实我自己也写过一些比如就是刚才我讲的这个拓展现实的，我也是2001年原来写过一个，就是2个世界之间融合以后，这个人在这2个世界之间生存困难的一些问题，我觉得这些都是我自己认为是未来主义的问题
对，好的，谢谢吴老师。那么我们现在的话，我看一下观众有没有反馈回来提问。如果没有的话呢，我们就先感谢吴老师，然后呢，我们就先邀请我们的下一位演讲人，是来自米兰理工大学设计学院的教授 Giovanna Piccinino. So hello, Professor Giovanna.
Welcome.
Nice to meet you.
I'm here.
Yeah, we can hear
I can share my screen.
Yes, please. Thank you very much.
It's okay for you?
Yep. Now we're seeing your browser.
It's impossible for you to see my screen?
Yeah, here is good.
Okay. There is a time. There is a time.
Yeah. Please.
Okay. Hello, everybody in the world, first of all. And thanks to the organizing committee of that fantastic conference on the future. I am Giovanna Piccinino, and I'm professor at the School of Design of Politecnico di Milano, and currently I am the president and coordinator of the Bachelor in Interior Design and the Master of Science in Interior and Spatial Design. Currently, I'm also and scientific director of Periscope, that is a research hub, a coordinator of a thesis incubator studio, that is a design studio in the master that work in relationships with agreement with the companies to develop strategic projects with our master students. Today, my speech is about a new taxonomy of contemporary spatial design towards a post-Anthropocene era. In fact, the exploration activity on spatial design, which I'm currently pursuing at the School of Design at the Design Department of the Polytechnico, has a sort of periscope in search of what we can call new horizon, looking far to the future. And they become both a lens of observation, also a methodological perspective of the project, or what I consider a new complex spatial calligraphy of the Earth. The periscope's research and also teaching these activities are, to me, opportunities to generate different logics, looking for, I consider really important, a new taxonomy of contemporary design that grows is rational from the increased urgent conditions that are ethical and global in their nature, which replace the world of design in new orientation of responsibility towards what I think are not sustainable emergencies, both humanitarian and ecological. So the aim of the research is an experimentation with disciplinary renewal, a new concept of spatial design that passes primarily as a conceptual experiment and subsequently as a formal aesthetic outcome. So we think as team that a new cognitive process is required, one that is able to change or even overturn our common approach to the project, that can represent and design new ethics and what we consider new geographies that are actually in development. So all the aspects connected with sustainable approach, the life cycle design, for spatial design discipline is very, very important to imagine a complex cycle of the process for the conceptual origin to the final dismission or updates. I'm also curious and very interested in looking at the past to observe how microcosm and macrocosm refer to a vision of cosmos where the two parts reflect each other and vice versa. From Pythagoras, Plato, Leonardo da Vinci, the wall of cosmos is something that was always considered the main structure of the universe. And so we have maybe to look back to learn a new balance. Also because as Emanuele Coccia, Italian philosopher that I just wrote a fantastic book named Metamorphosis. Emanuele Coccia teaches in Paris at the High School of High Studios and Social Science, and it serves that mankind life is already multi-specific. In fact, our DNA proves that we are biodiversity ourselves. DNA contain our biological and genetic evolution from the origin. And so I'm thinking, I am proposing a sort of new holism, a neo-holism that prefigure a new world between the different systems that compose currently our environment. So the natural system that exists in nature, man, for example, artificial system, man-made system, example, a car, or the mixed systems, man-made systems that contain natural subsystems and vice versa. So nature, always for the thought of culture, is itself a great technological laboratory. All living species work in a conscious way to transform the world around them and readjust it to their own existence. Any natural space is actually an artificial space. Even the air we breathe is not natural, but produced by millions of plant and cyanobacteria. So that fantastic image that show integrate nature speculum mirror of all nature and image of the art could be maybe suggest a new future for our design, action, and environment and earth. I'm really also interested to look at that particular dualism in what is nature or natural and what is artificial or artifice. In the two pictures, we can say what the natural landscape is able to create, irrational creation. In the desert of Sahara, we can learn that irrational attitude of nature. And on the right side, we can say our artificial landscapes that are logical, but in self-violent, that produce difference and change, strong change on the balance of Earth. Artificial product of scheduled change, where man is the author and all the transformation driven by biological principles. So to look at a new taxonomy of the hierarchy of that action, we think is an interesting action for the future. Look at some scholar, for example, Gilles Clément, French landscape architect, but also scientist because he is agronomist and botanist, is proposing to to go towards the symbiotic man, humans able to give back to the environment the totality of the energy that takes them away, like the trees that in nature are so able to do this. What leaves produced thanks to solar energy return to the ground, forming their nourishment. So we need a very strong shift in interest that coincides with the definition of the values linked to current main economies. A movement of substitution, this is interesting, not of violence, that presupposes slowness and progressiveness and the awareness of all the masses. So moving the axis of signification from the concept of territory to that of the earth as whole, also starting from the thoughts of the philosopher Deleuze, Guattari, that starting from the 70s proposed the rhizomatic thinking, that is a horizontal, sprawl, conceptual approach. The guidelines of the various researchers that we are leading respond to the question of complex landscapes and spaces, from the space of extraction, neglected space, residual, hyper-built, seeking a new idea of spaces that combines that infinitely small, connected with design action and spatial design action with the infinitely large, so on the planetary geography and scales, towards a different and necessary ethics of the project and an interpretative, completely rethinking of these spaces. I really connected interest and watch Kevin Kell, one of the supporters of the most radical stance of the neobiological attitude, describe his theory of the future neobiological civilization in a striking visionary manner. A civilization which is still being born from the integration of the kingdom on the born, natural, with the kingdom on the producer, so the artificial. Looking down here below on the figure, we can read the natural random self-organization, the natural self-organized architecture, the engineered self-organization, bottom-up and direct design, top-down. That four strips have to really join better each other and to create sharing and opportunity to put together the experience towards a more complex exchange between the systems. We are also experimenting and working by applying the fractal geometry that is not news, but it could be interesting, that vision. In mathematics, a fractal is a self-similar subject of Euclidean space with fractal dimensions slightly exceeds the topological dimensions. So fractal appears the same of different levels. And to imagine on the different scales of the project in which we work, when we have to resolve complex landscapes or big areas connected with the natural landscapes and space is very important. It's very interesting to be able to refer to what, for example, create in that short clip the geomorphical profile of a mountain, a triangle fractal, the model, the surface of the mountain. So that ability of the nature to create itself inside the structure, able to manage and to organize the different organisms from the biggest to the smallest. So in a plan, we define in particular way some plans and master plan from the largest scale to the smallest scale by using that attitude. We are trying to do it, to experiment this. If we look at this incredible images, but also terrifying in their nature, they are expressing the effect of the mankind action on the earth. So in every part of the world, the impact of industrial activities are so strong, from Nigeria to Russia, Italy, etc. So we have to transform, completely reinterpret the emergency that we have to control in relation of that particular effect. But it could be interesting because starting from that point, we can apply a lot of knowledge just to transform that place in something of different. For that reason, we experiment in relation of that. So in this general framework, landscapes of migration that are connected with humanitarian problem and extraction that are connected with ecological problem. To us are holograms of the controversial processes of planetary urbanizations. But we know that the movement of people being in the world is a particular condition of migration. So we have that dualism, that people that is constrained to move in the economical world, but also we have inside in our nature the condition of migration. So not a journey from one place to another, but a form of perpetual movement, a drift that accompany our life. So it's interesting to define the relationships between the emergency and what is a natural attitude in our human nature. So we exercise, we organize, we manage an interesting workshop, international workshop with Periscope. There was with UC London with Camillo Boano and the Kaisel Lab in New York, connected with the Vesila Polytechnic Institute with Alexandro Tsamis and Elisa Cattaneo. Our PhD, and she is a scholar of geographical fragility. We worked on the extraction place on the world to analyze the effect. It's curious to look at the colored image on the bottom right that show the difference between the country that are places of extraction where there are the sources and the current state that now work on exporting countries. For example, Canada and Australia, they change the dimension in relation to economical effect. So not only because they are place of extraction, because there is economical, the deformation, the transformation that is very, very interesting to understand the power of what and the impact and the effect on the economical and social condition. So we select a different location of extraction connected with the different minerals and materials and try to experiment. So now I show you some works, design works that try to apply the reason that I try to explain to you by starting from a conceptual hypothesis of what it means to transform a neglected and sometimes abandoned location or already working mine in relation or recreate a balance between social and ecological issues. So in general, the example that I show you are really working with the opportunity to use and reuse the local resources and transfer them in energy to recreate a hostable space. And there is always, now I don't explain every project, but if you look on the bottom left, there is always a study connected with the energetic problematic, the self-sufficient ability of that new project to sustain itself and the people by creating a virtuous circle of economical and also I can say social behaviors that sustain also the economical attitude. So you can say different projects in the different part on the world, all that try to define a dialogue between the surface of the earth and the heart of the earth, because a lot of them are in hypogeous condition with keeps and very, very strong effect on the balance in nature. And so that theoretical approach that try to define a progression of action. So exactly as Clément suppose, step by step to transform that space in something that could be replicated and create a sort of pollution of progression. the effect and the results were very, very unique, and maybe a suggestion in which we can work in the future by linking the different balance that we have to take in account. So the social, economical, natural condition that we have to control. All the projects define a sort of industrial attitude, a systemic attitude to be able to mount and to dismount the life cycle of what we are considering is very, very important. So by using natural resources, by consider the second life of what we are proposing, and maybe also reducing and transforming something of other. Also, by creating a real balance and by using pollution, for example, to transform pollution in opportunity, also by defending people, the citizens that currently are living that location, by defending them, by creating a sort of magic landscapes that is producing new oxygen and new opportunity with that two levels, a sort of big filter that define the levels of two worlds that step by step in the future will be able to integrate it, to transform what now is completely polluted with something that is again natural and in balance. In Italy, we have Carrara, that is a fantastic quiz where the marble of all the sculpture of the history worked, but is very, very interesting, but also a dramatic condition of violence on the earth. And also in that space, we can imagine a future that try to recreate a balance also for the citizens that are far from that space now by reintegrating new action and new opportunity of living. With the Marta Schwarz Studio, that is an international studio connected with spatial and landscape project, we worked some years ago on the climate change effect, also the side effect of climate change. I show you only a project, but we asked to our master student to create something that could be demonstrate and declare the dramatic condition of some action in a part of the world to another part of the world. So the sort of effect in which you don't see the effect of what you are doing, but in another part, nature is able to declare the damage that some action are doing. This is very clear, it's very simple, because it's the problem of the ice that is really in a dramatic condition of melting. And so the student creating a sort of installation in the center of Milan, in the park, that recreating the condition of dropping of the ice by using technological opportunity to transform the air in water and recreating a spectacular condition. So we can work in a lot of different way by declaring, by using also the opportunity that technology now can give us. So in conclusion, I can say that the research and teaching activities intend to sensitize the future generation of designers to the necessary evaluation and inclusion in the project process of the extent and complexity of the living and their environments toward what could be defined a shift in interest of our society towards the definition of values from material products towards intangible products, including the redevelopment on terrestrial environments. So, which is the shift in interest of previous school, research hub, is occupied with and preoccupied by what come next toward the we hope a post-Anthropocene era that maybe could be less unbalanced in terms of social, economical, natural, environmental, etc., conditions. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Giovanna. As we still have 3 minutes, may I ask you a question? So we have a question here. Under the structure of the new taxonomy of future spatial design, we wonder how shall the city planner, landscape designer, architect, ecologist, interior designer, furniture designer, and citizen to work together towards a better solution? What's your thoughts on how shall all of them work together? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a fantastic question because it could be fantastic if we were able in the future to cooperate. In my holistic vision, there is that opportunity to create a strong ability to cooperate also between the scholars of that different disciplines. So to me, it's very interesting to cooperate with scientists, with engineering, with the experts, sociologists, but also citizens will be part of the complex process that have to declare also the needs and the new behaviors we have to support. It's not easy. It's not easy because the sharing competence needs a plan, a really strong plan to manage the relationships. But in our school, we try to do it. In a particular experience, we know that that happened in part of the world. Also in Italy, we have a particular experimentation in that condition. But I think it's the only path we have to run to reach really concrete results that are able to resolve very global problems. But I think that also we have to start to do it because if I imagine to be able to create a global condition to work in that direction, it is very, very difficult. So I think that we have to start in some part where it's possible to do it in a sort of, a natural rhizomatic condition. So the action has to contaminate, the good action has to contaminate the current condition to develop project also by sharing the balance of the effort.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Giovanna. Thank you for the inspiring talk. Thank you. 那么我们非常感谢 Giovanna 教授来自米兰理工的分享。然后呢，那么下面呢，让我们来邀请非常著名的科幻作家和未来学者 Bruce Sterling 先生来为我们做下一个分享。Hello, Bruce Sterling. Hello, Professor Bruce. Nice to meet you. So now we would like to invite you to give the inspiring talk. We're looking forward to that.
Well, thank you for having me. It's very pleasant to appear on your screens in Beijing from the city of Turin in Italy. And yes, that's true. My name is Bruce Sterling, and I'm from the state of Texas in the USA. And I'm a futurist and a design instructor and also a science fiction novelist. So that's a rather unusual combination of tasks. But I'm also a world traveler. I've been to China on occasion, but mostly I travel in Europe and the USA. So I'm very interested in globalization and also global futures. So this is the cover of my most recent book. It's a book that will come out in the future. Actually, it's not released yet. A book called Black Swans and Robot Artists. And it is part of a project I had to create science fiction in Italy for Italians. So this was a cultural experiment of mine in the globalization of science fiction. I mean, can a writer from one country perform science fiction in a different language, in a different country, under different cultural conditions? And it seems that the answer is yes, because this is, in fact, a book. It's a collection of science fiction stories which are set in Italy and feature Italians and are about to be sold in the American market in English. So it's actually kind of a circular cultural movement there. So, but when I say science fiction, or in Italian, fantascienza, what do I actually mean? Well, science fiction is a literary genre, and it's 90 years old, which is quite old now. And it is a speculative literature, and it's futuristic in tone, and it's not factual like science is factual. It is fiction. But let's consider science fiction differently in a new way from the point of view of media design, or science fiction as cultural intervention, because science fiction is a form of content in some medium. And works of science fiction, like these books behind me, are design artifacts. Now, historically, these artifacts were written in national languages, and they were produced and distributed by national analog printing presses. And they were often illustrated comic books, science fiction, or they were cheap mass market magazines, or they were paperback books like many of these books behind me. And for most of its 90 years of history, science fiction was quite modest. It was a popular literature, but for small groups of fans and enthusiastic readers. But then science fiction moved into the media of cinema and television, very modestly at first. But in the 1970s, science fiction cinema became very large. And in the 1980s, science fiction computer games began to appear worldwide. So suddenly, national boundaries of scale were removed, and these science fiction artifacts became very large enterprises with global appeal. And I would mention Star Wars and the Marvel Comics franchise and Pokemon from Japan. I mean, obviously, those are not paperback novels. Those are very large, profitable international franchises which have lasted for decades. Now, Pokemon is a game for children, and I would not say that Pokemon is a great work of world literature, but Pokemon is a great work of media design because it was one of the world's first truly successful transmedia properties, which was designed for many cultures and many different media platforms all at once. Because Pokemon is a game, but it's also cinema, and it's books, and it's comic books, and it's clothing and other artifacts, playing cards. The most successful augmented reality game is Pokemon Go. And Pokemon is even a private economy because the cards can be traded among the players. So Pokemon is an extremely successful global export property. And this is why I mentioned Pokemon on this panel for Design Futures. Now, Chinese science fiction exists and has been around for many decades, but it has never yet had a Pokemon or a Star Wars. The role of Chinese science fiction has a different national tradition. And the virtue of Chinese science fiction is accustoming the Chinese population to modernization processes. And the genre also glamorizes science, technology, and engineering and makes technical work seem more attractive to young people. And these are good things to do. And Chinese science fiction has been doing that for quite a while, decades. However, Chinese science fiction is not designed for worldwide cultural intervention as an export. Instead, it has been Chinese swordplay fantasies and kung fu movies, which are designed for cultural export. And I would point out that those do rather well. And it was only recently that Chinese science fiction began to attract world attention and be read by political leaders and so forth. So I would argue today that Chinese science fiction could do much, much better. That's because other forms of globalized science fiction, such as Star Wars, Pokemon, and the Marvel Comics franchise, are old-fashioned. They are not modern. They're frankly quite antiquated. Some of these comic book heroes, which are celebrated in American blockbuster movies, such as Superman, perhaps the most famous comic book character in the world. Superman was created long ago, in the year 1938. You compare the state of China in 1938 to the state of China in the year 2020. Is that futuristic? So these platforms, they're not aspirational, hopeful, or futuristic visions. They're, in fact, rather retrograde and traditional. They're not inventive, and they're not very speculative. And the truth is that Chinese science fiction today, as a genre, is in a better creative mood than most other forms of science fiction worldwide. So there is some room worldwide for a Chinese aspirational vision and a Chinese designed futurity, and even a Chinese cultural avant-garde that declares itself to be a new and improved way of life. There is a worldwide moral vacuum for a soft power assertion of a better life for people. I do not say optimism because I don't believe that one nation's optimism has a global appeal. What actually has global appeal is better design. Now, that was the secret of Hollywood. It is not that Americans are always good and happy. It was the intense glamour of the goods and services shown on the screen. That was the true allure of Hollywood. So I'm not suggesting creating better books or movies with higher literary values or better cinematic values. I think that's a good thing to do, but it's work for authors and actors. And anyway, those two cultural forms, books and movies, are very 20th century. At the moment, cinema is in fact more or less dead. It's been killed by COVID-19, and there's very little happening in cinema. So today, I would ask designers this different and more modern question. What is the export version of Chinese national cyberspace? Okay, the internet with Chinese cultural characteristics is Chinese national cyberspace because it is state regulated and it has a great national firewall around it. All right, most people worldwide have in fact accepted this Chinese post-internet model, and they're busy imitating it. The Russians agree, the British agree, the European Union agrees, even the Americans tacitly agree, because the Americans no longer support a global internet. Instead, the Americans have 5 very large internet corporations, Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, and Microsoft, which is basically the internet with American cultural characteristics. So that is the cultural reality of this decade, the 2020s, But though we now have these many digital post-internet empires, we do not have cultural export models. No one has thought them through. No one has designed them. No one has built them. No one has deployed them. We lack well-designed methods of peaceful cultural influence. Now, China has more ambition in this regard than most other modern countries. For instance, the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative is an infrastructure export model. But what do people watch on the high technology Belt and Road? What is their entertainment in these shipping centers on the Belt and Road? They have 5G towers. That's fine, but what does the 5G convey? Where is the content? What do people see that is future-minded and also glamorous, exciting, progressive, hopeful, and motivating? There's very little in contemporary popular entertainment that has these virtues of science fiction. We don't even have the soft power appeal of Russian satellites or American blue jeans or Japanese transistor radios, powerful interventions from the previous century. Instead, our cultural affairs are quite gloomy, and our ideas about the future are mostly fearful. This is not healthy. Now, it might be argued that there is no need to tell the rest of the world what to think. I mean, why struggle to entertain the foreigners? Why inspire them? Why amuse them? Why try to charm them? Is this perhaps an act of cultural hegemony? Is it arrogant to display our virtues in an attractive and even seductive way? Well, consider South Korean musical pop stars. Okay, South Korean pop stars are extremely successful. But do we really want to have huge numbers of fans worldwide who are teenage girls? Teenage girls. Do we want to talk to them? All right, teenage girls are young and silly. They are vulgar. They are immature. They are obsessed with surface appearances. Teenage girls are not political sophisticates. They lack the virtues of adult patriotic citizens. They're teenage girls. But I would point out that teenage girls are particularly futuristic people. We can discuss the future, but teenage girls will bury us. They will actually live in the future. Now, when a society lacks a vision that inspires its youth, that is a sign of cultural crisis. The sign of true cultural power is when you are inspiring the youth of other people. The youth of other people. Success comes when young people who are seeking their own identities want to acculturate to your identity. They want to wear your clothes. They admire your brands, your products. They use slang from your language because they find you culturally attractive. All right, how is this done? How would China do that? Well, I don't tell you, but I can suggest a trial. Consider this as a class project in design school. Teach your students about the history of the American movie Star Wars. Point out that this movie was invented in the year 1978. That this movie, which is still a going concern and very profitable, is a movie which is older than their parents. Ask your design students to create a modern Chinese Star Wars franchise that suits modern media circumstances. And it should be larger, more profitable, and more culturally influential than Star Wars. Do not ask them about the story or the plot of the film, because the plot of Star Wars is ridiculous. Instead, ask them about the design future of highly imaginative and highly fantastic cultural exports from China meant for other people. Then tell them that although they are young design students, they are designing this project for people younger than themselves. If you try this experiment, I think you'll be surprised at how interested your students are in a project of this kind. I think you'll be surprised how hard design students would think about that project and how hard they would work. I suspect you would be surprised how much enthusiasm they would have for this idea and how much creative energy would be liberated among them. And it's just an experiment. It costs very little. You could do that quickly and easily, because to build the future is very expensive, but to imagine it is quite cheap. So that's what I have to say for your panel. And good luck with your very interesting conference, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Bruce. May I ask you one question? When you write your science fiction, like what might be a good way for you to absorb to get some inspiration or to think about what future might be? What do you mind doing?
I'm a great believer in actually going there.
Okay.
I think it's very important to just pick up and move to a new place. You know, that if you want to write about
thank
science
you, Mr.
in the
Bruce.
lab, you need to befriend
may I
some
ask you one question?
That's why I'm also a journalist. And, you know, I would not have dared really to write so many imaginary stories about Italy without, in fact, relocating in Italy. And I think that's actually the way to do it. And I think and before the epidemic, it was easy to do. Now travel is quite difficult, but it's something we can do in this century that previous centuries really couldn't do. I mean, you can globalize yourself. Just go ahead, pack up and go, right? And also through social media, it's much easier to follow people who you want to fictionalize. Just get very close to them. I mean, surveil them almost, right? Just look down their names, addresses, look them up on Wikipedia, you know, ask journalistic questions, who, what, when, where, why, how. Write nonfiction about it first so that you know you understand it, and then fictionalize it. And, you know, I think that's doable. I mean, I myself don't do a lot of it because I'm lazy. Actually, I'm an old man and I don't like to work very hard. But I think this is the actual design future that we have. You know, and if I were 19 years old, I'd be very enthusiastic about it.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Bruce. Thank you very much. And 那么我们非常感谢 Bruce 先生对于这个未来科幻写作这个方面的一些探索。然后，那么下面呢，我们邀请我们的第4位 panel 的嘉宾，是来自米兰理工大学智慧城市融合创新硕士项目的联合策划人 Christopher 教授。The next one, we would like to invite Professor Christopher. He will introduce. Hello.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Professor Christopher. Hi.
Yes, how are you? I'm getting a strange lighting effect here, but let me see if I can come back into the space here. How's everyone?
Italy, right?
Yes, we're getting the sunlight in. Welcome. I mean, I'm very pleased to be here. I wanted to thank all of you. But are you going to mention anything else, or should I start?
Sure. I would like to finish introducing your titles. 然后 Christopher 先生是Mustafa 科万，然后呢，他呢是米兰理工大学智慧城市融合创新硕士项目的联合策划人，也是科万媒体设计工作室的主理人。Okay, so it's your turn. Do you want to share your screen, or you gonna just talk to the screen? Are you going to do screen sharing?
Yes, I will. I wanted to thank Professor Fu Zhiyong and Sha Jing, and also Cheng Shu-Chin for being the host today, and very excited to be here. So and I was very excited by the previous speakers' presentations.
Thank you.
Okay. Can you see that okay?
Yes, you can do full screen.
Yes, full screen.
Okay.
Okay, welcome everyone. I'm getting this sunlight coming in, so it's creating a strange effect. But a quick introduction on myself. I actually grew up in a family of designers. My parents were both, who just recently passed away, were architects, graphic designer, painters, and so I grew up in a household of design and artists, and went on to study architecture and fine arts. I lived in Italy, did all my early training and design education and professional work, starting out in Milan, Italy, and then went pretty much around the world, ended up coming back to MIT to go to MIT to try to bring design into the future with technology and figuring out what how do I bring technology to other fields in the arts. And what was interesting about that was that at the Center for Advanced Visual Studies, where I studied at MIT, there was no boundaries at all. I mean, we were working on and conceptualizing projects from outer space to anything on Earth. It was very much, I would say, completely open-ended and transdisciplinary. So that's really been the direction of my work. I don't really say that I am one type of designer. I'm working in many mediums. I've worked in urban planning to film to graphics to web design, and where it all sort of came around to becoming something about smart cities. And I ended up working in Beijing for 7 years and co-teaching with Professor Fu Zhiyong at Tsinghua University, which was an amazing experience to be that period of time in my life in Beijing and developing classes on many ideas on smart cities and urban interface and information architecture. So out of that experience, Professor Fu and I developed this book, which was an extension of the research we had done and my teaching previously at Parsons School of Design and Harvard University. So the interesting thing about the book is that we had to really develop it all in black and white for the print, for the Elsevier. So I'm going to show some of the contents of the book in the discussion of convergence innovation. Some of the previous speakers touched upon the convergence of humankind, technology, and nature, and that's really the theme of the book, because when you talk about technology, by the time the book is published, your book is already obsolete. So what we really wanted to look at is a much longer term understanding of how technology is impacting the world. And so if we look at Earth's evolution and human evolution and the digital evolution, all converging in the next 50 to 100 years, maybe because of COVID, this time frame is sped up. But I did actually try to map this out. We tried to map this out in a kind of trajectory of evolution from innovation cycles, population growths, and Moore's law, which, as you may all know, is that the chip doubles in its speed and the cost reduces, so that allows supercomputers to continue to advance very rapidly. So how do these forces converge in the next 50 years, where AI really smart connected objects will allow us to embed all aspects of life and technology into the physical, digital, and and the city and this human brain as a kind of one neural network, driven, connected organism. We studied what the outcomes were. We wanted to have outcomes from this. What were the goals? And we looked at in those convergence of those different systems, nature is maybe the outcome would be balance. Humankind, we believe, is well-being, and technology is optimization through AI. So these things have some converging properties, but they also have their individual properties that they need to achieve to, ultimately arrive at this convergence. Sorry, I keep hitting the wrong button here. Sorry, go back. So in terms of a kind of progression and evolution from, let's say, in an urban design context, we have kind of object-centric physical urban design, which led to more within smart cities, which involved the digital component, became sort of interactive spaces. And then we tried to make that more human and ecocentric in the last sort of generation. And now we're moving into this kind of new collective intelligence, which is human technology and nature merging together, away from only maybe of a human-centric or even natural-centric approach to something that is beyond all of those combined. Which the kind of traditional diagram of convergence is cities, technology, and society. We're looking at this even broader in terms of the natural environment, the physical environment, and nature and the biological nature as part of this convergence. So a new hybrid or convergent space is design, technology, nature, and self-actualization through a new collective intelligence. We are starting to look at new forms of combinations. So human to human, human to machine, machine to machine, machine to nature, human to kind of earth, to nature, human to nature. All of these new combinations are leading to a new kind of collective intelligence and sub-intelligence between each of the different relationships that are forming. And that really leads to the convergence innovation, where open innovation and convergence lead to a new dynamic economy and sustainable development. This is from a paper on technology convergence by Han-Sik Park that I just referred to. And then looking at, in terms of how the smart connected world of spaces, people, objects, and nanotechnology will become all intertwined at different scales, from macro to micro. And then very importantly is the transdisciplinary approach, which we factored into all of our thinking, which is really bringing in all the different understandings from environmental urban studies to computer science and entrepreneurship and communication media. And all of this has to come together to develop the new design of the future. We can't be working kind of in independent silos, because there's too much complexity in all of the new realities that we're facing, and especially that man has created. So, and then in terms of the convergent singularity, in terms of technology, robotics, informatics, genetics, and nanotechnology are merging into one, new kind of new ecosystem that has many different dimensions. And we also have the kind of binary transitions between left and right, between digital and analog, or between human computer. So this has led us to the digital twin concept, where now we can mirror reality in the digital space, and the simulacrum of nature through the digital interpretation is slowly becoming a real-time, pure simulation, which will at some point merge between the physical and the digital reality. At the moment, we're still living in this sort of duality that other speakers have talked about today. I think, at some point, these two realms will converge, and they are converging. And so we tried to look at the convergence integration is not only technological, but it could be from top down to bottom up. It could be from government driven to citizen driven. It could be from a capitalist driven market towards technology to a more of a socialist system, and more from public to private, and maybe people owning things to more open source. This convergence is happening in many different hybrids that we need to bring in, to design into our entire holistic system of as an operating system. I wanted to re-mention that this all of these diagrams were from the book. We had to do them in black and white, so it's sort of interesting to try to simplify things through black and white. This leads into the themes of resilient, self-regulating systems, optimizing resources, and looking at, for example, at airports becoming ecological spaces. This is a project I worked on in Thailand for a new airport, which is completely integrating into the landscape while still serving, the purpose of transportation with new forms of transportation. And then city DNA, we did a study with Tsinghua University, our team, on analyzing different Chinese cities in terms of what their competitive advantages are, based on the idea that cities are, have their individual DNA. This is based on Michael Porter's model of competitive advantages, both in companies and businesses, but that competitive advantage is what sort of drives the origin and the result of cities, is really what we're calling the city DNA, that determines how cities themselves then develop, both spatially, socially, technologically. All of those determining factors will lead to the outcome of how cities develop from their let's say early developmental stages, in terms of how they will integrate and change over time through technology. And then, of course, into new mobility solutions, well-being and healthcare. We've been, looking at how to integrate from the personal to the systemic level on healthcare systems. New urban densities based on the post-COVID reality, where we have to think about public space in a different way. These are projects I'm working on currently. This is in New York, outside of New York City. And then into new urban informatics, and how people integrate. This is a vision I designed for Paris, and a new kind of holographic data visualization that's interactive, that becomes kind of public interactive space, where the data becomes part of the actual living system. And then urban media, looking at the city as an entire communication spectrum, that the city itself is a form of language, is a communication language in real time, especially in China, as I saw more and more, like in Japan and Times Square, New York, where cities are becoming, literally visual digital spaces. But it's not only about this city as a digital space, but it's all of the content that's being transmitted from cities and being extended globally and interacting globally with other cities, and the whole mixture of what's being communicated by cities to once within their own brand sort of strategy, and how that links to their position, both as competitive positioning in the marketplace, but also creating its own kind of cultural language that is emerging out of both the physical and digital space. And finally, I think the concept of living labs is very important in all of this, that the city is a living, adapting, transforming experiment. And there's no real answer to how it can be solved in a specific way, because technology is changing, our society is changing, and we need to think about that, building the living lab, the living organism of the city as a continual evolution. Some of the tools and methods that we're using is looking at macro, micro, looking at everything from the environment scale down to district to nanotechnology, how it's all being integrated and embedded. Sense making through looking at stakeholder hardware, software, and the combination. Each element has to be considered in the design, co-design of the platform of the new city. And human-machine collective intelligence, where we use co-design and human-centered design thinking approaches with machine learning applications, so that we're now in this kind of transition stage between human using human intelligence and ways humans can design and think in a very broad and open-ended way, and then reinforcing that through machine learning and generative design, which is where we can rapid prototype many different iterations and continually change the criteria to find better and better solutions, which at some point become self-generating in the sense that it continually find the best solution and adapt and transform in real time. Data analytics, of course, what I've been looking at and what we studied was, that there's sort of different types of data from biological human patterns and machine data, and how these different representations and types of data will slowly become amalgamated into kind of a new human biotechnical form of evolutionary data. And then finally, a big part of our book was to develop a total operating system and all of the typologies as a way to describe the total ecosystem and all of the functions, so that we could then break each level down from macro objectives to individual components of the system. This was and so some of the design methods we have looked at is bringing, of course, the human social factor machine and how technology is influencing the evolution of systems and the nature. So it's factoring the three sort of vertical forces into the evolution, how that influences the city-DNA and the unique characteristics. And then from that, developing the system architecture that is an extension of the evolution and the unique city DNA, and then all of the components coming together. And we've studied this across what we do: scenarios, functions, and solutions, and input and output, so that we've developed this methodology to understand the complexity of each city and how each city is evolving in its own trajectory in this convergence. We are launching now the Convergence Masters Program. This is the brochure, still in a work in progress, but it's Designing the Future Smart City Masters Program with the Politecnico di Milano and Tsinghua University. This program, will be linking, very much linking research with the industry. It's very much trying to bring a hands-on approach and, of course, multidisciplinary. And we'll be working on real projects in real case studies, both in China and in Italy and Europe, and very much open lab, living lab model, bringing in new technologies and customizing to different training. We're going to be working on sort of very workshop focused and working with the community to develop real applications. So the program will launch in the spring on both in it will be in virtual format for the first semester while we wait for the travel restrictions. At some point, we want to have students all come to Italy, but in the first semester, we will be having courses in China and teaching virtually. But the real idea is creating this program around an innovation hub based in Milan, and linking the Milan design community with Beijing and academics, and then working globally, bringing in business partners. And this is in itself a form of convergence between East and West. So we really want to look at academic research with real world models, bringing European and Asian ideas together, and not be sort of thinking as Chinese cities or it's, but each, or European cities or American cities or South American cities or African cities. We want to bring it together, but we want to understand each city, each culture, their different approaches, and how the different types of cities all need, whether it's a historic city or it's a new city, they will need different solutions, but we want to bring the convergence of of these different points of view. And so that is kind of achieving this local multidisciplinary approach to smart cities and looking at this very much as an applied project-based program. So thank you very much for your attention and look forward to any questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Christopher. May I ask you one question? Regarding your slides talking about machine learning to support design thinking.
Yes.
Yeah. So in that slide, I think it's very fascinating to see like how you analyze about how machine learning to support when designers is applying design thinking in solving a problem. So I wonder if you have an example that you could share with us regarding this. Thank you.
Well, I think many examples. I mean, we could say that we're really looking at how we can combine the human intelligence and human ability to rapid prototype ideas, and on sketching on paper is still, very much a skill set that we possess, that we can think very much in open-ended systems. We're not constrained by, say, having to, let's say with a machine, algorithms. We have to actually program the algorithms with special logics that doesn't necessarily have the wide range of human brainstorming capabilities. So what we want to do is we want to be able to we have to work between human ability to brainstorm and think very much outside of the box, and then program through basically machine learning to be able to use we need to use generative design to rapid prototype many variations, and that will continue to grow and learn. There are different labs forming now that are using this combination, generative design, both in, of course, we know in industrial design, whether it's component design, or it could be on urban configurations, designing new urban patterns based on the criteria. So this is very much happening right now, and I think it's the future of design. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you very much for introducing smart city programs as well. It's very interesting.
Thank you very much.
好的，非常感谢。那么我们今天夏老师，我们今天可能第一阶段的这个分论坛这个部分，4位演讲嘉宾的分享也都结束了，然后也非常感谢我们这边收集的问题。那么夏老师，我这边就交给您这边开始下面的活动。
好的，没问题。谢谢陈淑欣老师。那我们接着后面阶段的议程，thanks to the moderator and the 4 speakers of panel 1 for giving 2 varied sharing from different perspectives. Next, let's welcome our second keynote speaker today, Clive Van Heerten. Professor Heerten is the founder and director of VHM Design Futures London, and he is the visiting lecturer of RCA Imperial College Central Academy of Fine Art. Let's welcome. Professor Heerten. Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me to the conference. The little bit that I've managed to hear has been absolutely fascinating. I look forward to hearing the other very illustrious speakers that you've lined up. I was going to speak a little bit about, if I can just share my screen, 1 second, sorry. Is that working? Okay, so what I was going to speak about was the the work that we've done, which has evolved within a corporate technology environment. You know, we spent having a sort of a design and social science background. We ended up, after graduating in the late 1980s, into technology research and spent a lot of time working at the coalface of new and enabling technology development. And one of the things that we saw along that route was that there were an enormous number of extremely good ideas that were later validated by corporations that managed to turn that into extremely successful product and service down the line. But these things were killed by focus groups. They were killed by a process of testing future ideas, which was, from our perspective, very, very inadequate. And we grappled for a long time on trying to develop methods which would inform us about what was coming later down the line, not just from a technological perspective. And in fact, later, as time went on, we relied less and less on what was seen as the sort of logical outcomes of new technology development. We were more interested in finding what was happening within society, what was the changes that were taking place socioculturally, politically, economically, environmentally, as describing a context that we could innovate in, or that we could anticipate new product genres, new ways of doing things within that. So our purpose was very, very much to develop an alternative to linear, incremental futures that within corporations, for very good reasons, when vision is presented, it's very much based, or it's very often based on these next steps in the evolution of technology. So we set out to basically try to create a way of seeing what was in the peripheral vision, seeing what was changing in society that would either sort of put up a road sign, a warning sign to the logical progression of whatever it was that we were doing, as well as expose new opportunities. So, just very briefly, so in being a social scientist, I was always sort of interested in whether or not there were patterns of influence, whether or not you could see some of the sort of early warning signs by looking backwards historically at similar disruptions, right? So we know that history doesn't repeat itself, but that it does echo, and that we also know the influence of crisis in the sort of stop-start process historically. We know that while a crisis might affect a particular path within our history, it has this knock-on effect. We see that for instance, if you look at what happened in previous pandemics, you saw that the change didn't only manifest itself in the sort of quality of people's health or their longevity or anything like that. It had an effect on the eating habits, the burial rituals, the belief systems, the recreational activities of people, and so on. There were massive social consequences to that disruption. And obviously, looking at later crises, the effect of technology on this process and its effect upon technology was very, very substantial. So we started to try to create futures. This is going back several decades. And one of the things that we, from an obvious standpoint, we started to explore what either designers or technologists at the time were tending not to look at. What were the subtle changes that were taking place in society? And we came to the realization that trends tend to tell us more about the present than they do about the future, that they are not necessarily that useful in pointing to future developments. And you see this because many very, very, very successful product categories run aground. They run out of steam and they disappear. And it's curious to us that so many of these things, which were sort of developed by world-beating, world-dominating corporations, didn't anticipate those changes, that they, in a sense, ran out of steam or ran over the edge of the cliff, despite the fact that the signs were there over a very long period of time. So our method was in effect trying to find very, very sort of untested tendential indicators, weak signals, critical events, potential future crises, whether they be in the sphere of the environment, the economy, politics, youth fashion, changing habits and behaviors and desires in music, etc. Right? Whatever the information that was, we tried to see significance within it. We tried to sort of overcome our natural professional prejudice, that whether we're an engineer or a designer, a scientist, an archaeologist, we all have a way of looking at that future. Anyway, I don't want to spend too much time on methodology. What is significant, perhaps, is what was different. Unlike a lot of the forecasting that was going on at the time, we set about trying not to predict futures, but indeed to test them. And in order to do that, we needed firstly to understand this future context, as I've already mentioned. But secondly, we needed to manifest it. We needed to physically create it, which posed all sorts of problems. It posed problems in terms of a design language, how if you're trying to get people to understand a potential future, a preferable, possible, probable future, what is going to eliminate the sort of natural human tendency to relate information to what we know. So the minute you present something in a design language which is contemporary, people start to relate it to that. Similarly, the brand, to differentiate yourself from the brand that you are inevitably presenting a future for, there is a huge amount of baggage. People have an expectation. They have all of these associations that apply. So we're trying to get people to look at the picture and not the frame, to basically see a set of issues and react to them in as unguarded a way as we possibly can. So we present these physical scenarios in museums, exhibitions, in speaking engagements, in as many contexts that are differentiated from in essence where they are originating from. And they are always presented with a narrative, similarly, to try to dislocate the actual content from the sorts of connections that people are making in a contemporary scenario. And finally, we present multiple scenarios. We don't, as it's a test of a future, we are not making a prediction. The examples that I'm going to show you are not product or service suggestions. These are not things that are on a product roadmap. These are tests to see what are likely futures that are going to unfold as we move on. So I'm going to show you an example or a couple of examples of design probe provocations, over the last 15 years, and I'm intentionally using examples that are historical to show to an extent how the incubation period of a lot of these ideas tends to take place over decades rather than over years, which is what most corporate vision projects look at. Most corporate vision projects are in a period of between 1 and 5 years, typically 3 years, which is a blink in a blink of an eye in time terms. So a lot of our work has been looking at, I thought Professor Kirwan's talk was very, very interesting in looking at the connection between nature and human. We've been obsessed with indirect communication, in a sense, how we most of our interaction as human beings is indirect, the way in which we communicate, the way in which we socialize, and so on. And yet, all of our interaction with machines tends to be very, very codified, very layered, very programmatic. We sit and push buttons and operate remote controls and all of the rest of it, despite the fact that there is this plethora of information that is being generated in our movements, in our proximity, in our walk, our gaze, our stance, our inflection, our facial expression, and all of the rest of it that we don't utilize. So we, after a very long period of working in the sort of wearable electronic and conductive textile space, we started to explore what happened on the surface of the body and around the body, the near environment of the body. And this provocation, for instance, done in 2007, was very much about subcutaneous technology. None of the stuff I should mention is science fiction. It might not be realizable at the time that they are produced, but they always go through a sanity check. They are not. We try as much as possible for there to be a scientific basis to the likelihood or probability of being able to achieve these. So with tattoo, we were interested in what would happen. How would youth culture utilize or work with the tools of subcutaneous technologies? What would happen when we could produce addressable ink through the end of a needle? How would our culture accept that and utilize that? Once we've produced a provocation of this sort, we exhibit it, we publish it, we put these things on social media and YouTube and all of the rest of it. And out of all of the information that we gather, we create what we call contextual insights, not consumer insights. We're looking at a future application that is to a certain extent hypothetical. And in presenting them to an audience of people, we understand that the feedback is impressionistic and that it's not quantitative. However, I could deviate and get into whether other testing methods in similar processes are quantitative, which we would seriously question. We think that they give a very realistic, based on historical experience, impression of what are likely futures moving down the line. So I was going to focus on one example. Within the company that we were working for at the time, Philips, we started to look at livable cities, at what would be the likely city of the future. And of course, we've just been hearing from real experts on this subject. And one of the first things that we did, given that one of our major themes is the environment and high-rise sustainability, as we refer to it, and we set about trying to find eco-cities. We kept seeing on the internet, there were this and that and eco-city, and we went and looked at them all. We went searching for eco-cities, and we couldn't find any. Right, every time we got to an eco-city, it had a bunch of technology, sort of in the form of photovoltaics and wind turbines and all of the rest of it. But looking at the resources and management of resources in these cities, they didn't deviate from the most inefficient, polluting, what we believe to be unsustainable urban environments that you could mention. In essence, all of the utilities that the city was reliant on, water, food, sanitation, energy, and so on, were dislocated processes. And even although all of the great cities in the world have evolved from slums, we've tended to apply a very Taylorist, very sort of almost Fordist approach to the separation of these processes in how we approached urban design. And given that we're not urban designers, we always take a naive outside view on these subjects. Bringing it back to the world that we were in, the home, we saw the same thing. We saw our homes as being incredibly energy and resource consumptive. Our homes suck in resources and they spit out waste. There is very little integration of the services and utilities within it. Our refrigerator is generating heat in order to make cold, and yet right next to it there is a cooker that is trying to make heat from a standing start. Why do we have so many of these independent processes where the output of one system is not the input to another? We look at nature, as this diagram shows you. There is no waste. Nature is a perfect system where everything's output becomes something else's input. And we were interested in whether or not you could sort of approach the city or the home from sort of from a permacultural standpoint. Could you design it as an ecosystem? Could you go back to basic? We were also struck by the fact that, or we were also constantly reminded that so many of the problems that we were dealing with at a sort of on a global scale were the product of, dare I say it, sort of under-considered technology and product processes. And design is complicit in this. We feel, that design, as in all design, including engineering, architecture, everybody that creates stuff should seriously question the materials, the processes, the later outcome of the consequences of the decisions that we make in doing it. So we set about trying to figure out what a 10 to 20 year projection would look like. And, the first thing we was trying, I should mention that in 2009, when we started this work, we were in the 6 billions, and the projection was that we would grow to 9.4 or something billion. Obviously, those numbers have been updated. But effectively, we were looking at a 40%, roughly speaking, increase in population. But in order to drive that, we were looking at a 300% increase in primary resource utilization. And many of the experts at the time were saying that this didn't work out. Mathematically, we were in trouble. That basically, to power just the energy requirement of that increase in urbanization, 70% urbanized, 70% of which were living on the coasts in sort of declining areas. So and we didn't think that this was a particularly good idea, having just gone and made a movie at the Chernobyl nuclear power station that melted down 25 years prior to doing this. So in all of the work that we do, we will collaborate with people that have an expertise or have an insight or an experience in a particular area. Very often these people are artists. We are great believers in the innovative, in sort of art as an instrument of innovation, if you like. And as Professor Kern was talking about, we similarly work in a very transdisciplinary way. So we collaborated with an NGO in a non-governmental organization in India called the Sulabh Foundation, who built sanitation blocks around India, an amazing organization doing incredible work. And they have perfected over many decades a whole lot of alternative technology approaches to sanitation. And in particular, they developed a toilet that flushes with 1 liter of water, unlike 14 liters of water in California, where you effectively have the water reserves to support, or in Los Angeles, to support a population of under 1 million people, right? And the projected growth for that area is something staggering. So these are built for exhibition. These are amplified and exploded views of processes, in that we are wanting people to respond to them. We're wanting people to respond to the idea of the waste in the toilet being something that is processed, right? What would the reaction to this be? How would people react to the issue of what we're separating liquids and solids? In this example, you're seeing people washing their hands in filtered effluent. We've put a methane digester in the middle of the kitchen, right? Now, again, all of this, and all of the basic techniques of this had been developed and were being practiced in India. Many of the things that you will see in this provocation have existed for thousands of years in North Africa or in the Indian subcontinent and in parts of Asia, etc. But our purpose is not to present what you're looking at here, a biodigester in the kitchen, where you are seeing the effect of the various atmospheres and gases and processes going on within it. It's to get a reaction to the issues. And surprisingly enough, so effectively, the digester is connected to what would be an alternative form of food preservation, right? So, a big theme of ours has been the shift from refrigeration to cultivation and looking at the symbiotic relationship between different decomposing materials. So the hot water pipes are wrapped around the digester, which heat up and are producing they're also carrying gas, as you can see from the lighting. But they're taken to this device located in the table, which is a twin-walled terracotta evaporative cooler. Now, again, it's a technology that has existed for a very long period of time, and we know that it wouldn't work in certain parts of the world given the issues of humidity and all of the rest of it. But effectively, you keep this granular sandwich wet with a vapor layer, and because of Charles's law, as a gas expands, it cools. You're using nature in essence to cool food. Now, that's not fundamentally different to what is happening in the tubes within a refrigerator, but it's exploded into a completely alternative style of connecting food consumption and food preparation. Firstly, our homes have become Western homes at any rate. The kitchen has become this sort of tyrannical imprisonment of people looking at the wall and dealing with all of these dislocated processes. So all decomposing material produces gases, principally methane and ethylene. And ethylene speeds up the decomposition of the things around it. So we think that we have an effective solution in a refrigerator. But a refrigerator is a volume in which you have these atmospheres that are actually speeding up decomposition, not only of the stuff around a particular food, but indeed that food itself. So whereas, if you want your cucumbers to taste like, your eggs to taste like cucumbers, it's a very effective instrument. But if the only way of dealing with the microbial content within a refrigerator is by keeping it as close to 0 degrees as possible, we need to rethink that. We need to actually start to develop processes that are less energy consuming and that are more symbiotic. We're very keen to sort of explore bioluminescent bacteria, in particular, coming out of the sludge of the digester. And one of the things that transpired, we don't work with a brief. We research a territory, and within that territory, we try to see what would unfold naturally moving forward. And in exploring this, this BioLite, as it came to be known, is using E. coli to stimulate fluorescent proteins. And these are pathogenic bacteria. When people hear E. coli, they panic and think, this is what develops in rotten food and is potentially harmful to human beings. And in testing the idea at exhibition and all of the rest of it, we were expecting people to say, am I going to die from this? Is this thing potentially dangerous? It's open. It's a living product. And that, in effect, became the most important aspect of the test, that nobody reacted to that. That wasn't a concern at all, right? The fact that it was a living product that was self-energizing and self-repairing and that could respond to people in a room, it could respond to the social or environmental condition in which it was situated, became the test. Now, we know that that's not the future of lighting. We know that it is highly unlikely that somebody is going to make a product like this, or that your kids would be able to do their homework in this kind of light. But in understanding the issue of shifting from static, benign, unintelligent, enabler type product objects to things that were living and dynamic and responsive and evolving, and that were linked to the things going on around them, that was the importance of the test. It was people's lack of reaction to what our assumption had been, which is very often the problem with linear forecasting or creating linear future model, is that we start with where we are at the present. We start with the technology that we are developing and project it into a future, rather than derive it from a future as we move on. So, we also test these futures on different age groups. So in the case of this urban beehive, we were very aware of declining bee populations around the world, and our company certainly indulged our exploration of a lot of what we would see as sort of social concern issues, that our issues with environmental damage or climate change, or indeed some of the political issues affecting how we make stuff and deal with it once we finished using it. We were interested in how kids would react to living food, how kids would react to this, and bees being a very interesting example. Declining bee populations, 40% of everything on the planet is pollinated by bees, and yet, most children think it comes out of a bottle. So we would test an idea on a particular age group. Similarly, with waste upcycling, this was an experiment based on the work of an American scientist, Paul Stamets, whose work on, in principle, the bioremedial effect of mushrooms and mycelium in particular. We were looking at whether or not you could develop a waste upcycler to process oil-based plastics within the home, again, without using energy. Whether you could change a ritual, whether you could develop a new habit or behavior within the home that would have a more beneficial effect later down the line. We will then apply this stuff, what we learn, the contextual insights that we develop later, through the testing process, which happens in two phases. It happens in very, very broad, very mass, getting this absolutely unpredictable sets of reactions from different communities over a period of time. And we will then do targeted, much more empirical research based on the sort of topography of those initial reactions. And that theme about moving from refrigeration to cultivation became very thematic, and looked at how we could apply a lot of this stuff in microcultures, in understanding the unique properties and requirements of stuff that we utilize in the home, and the optimum condition for dealing with those things as we go forward. So, we don't expect one of the companies that we work for to effectively produce a worm composter and put it on the market, although we're probably getting to the phase where there would be a sector of the community that would go for something like that. We're looking at whether or not the issue of using non-electromechanical or electronic or energy reliant type applications has a place in our thinking about how we design and evolve machines whether they be the application of IoT, which is predominantly electromechanical and which we expect to change very rapidly in the sort of post-COVID era, or whether it be in looking at some of the more traditional areas that we've looked at. I don't have a clock. Can anybody tell me how we're doing for time?
We have still 4 minutes.
4 minutes, okay. Right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So, and as I mentioned, the way of thinking that emerges from this process of not presupposing an outcome, for not sort of setting up a brief that says that you're looking at this parameter of a particular issue, but researching a territory and saying how within this do we find application, gives rise to things that we might not ordinarily have thought about. So for instance, this product concept and service concept that we generated in 2006 was about whether or not you could apply the principle of an iTunes or an eBay to connected domestic appliance, rather than simply the product in itself. The product solution came from this future exploration of an unfolding context, looking for the problem, which we then find the technical solution for. And whatever space that is, we attempt as much as possible to take the naive view. We are not experts on robotics or on microbial fuel cells. We're not experts on nutrition in going into these spaces, which is why collaborating with experts becomes so important. And coming back to these two themes, the theme of the body, the theme of the human being and how it responds to its near environment, physiologically, as well as in the sort of, the neurochemical responses that we have to different situations. We will present a critique of a line of thought. So, for instance, looking at sustainability and how we think about the interconnections between wetlands and our food supply, we presented this concept for the Shanghai World Fair in that as a provocation about this interdependency, using naturally decomposing human waste and then combining the best elements of an aquaponic system with a hydroponic system, but not using energy. It's using natural light diffusion and burning methane. It's positing the question, can you produce 5,000 calories a day on the 30th floor of a high-rise in Shanghai as furniture, as opposed to, do you need a farm later down the line? Now, in the 10 years or 9 years or whatever it is since the concept has been produced, there's been a lot of sort of more sophisticated work done in the sphere. Am I getting the nod? Okay. So yeah, just in summary, our approach is essentially to describe a future based on as much disparate, unconnected, trivial, scientific, technological, political, economic, whatever indicators as we can possibly create. And within that space to form a team that is made up of firstly, with no imbalance. There's there's very careful gender balance. There's very careful balance between people coming from different disciplines. And it's a process trying to convert the methodological tensions that inherently exist because of the way that we are taught and the way that we become hyper-specialized in our pursuits into creative tension. And out of that, we evolve the solution in this organic process by killing off and and blowing life into particular aspects of the inquiry. Ching, is that me? Done.
Hi. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks to Professor Heaton for the wonderful lecture from the futurology and art and design perspective. Okay, now let's welcome. I will share my screen. Okay. Okay, now let's welcome Professor Fu Zhiyong, the Vice Director of China-Italy Design Innovation Hub of Tsinghua University, to launch up the Blue Book. Hi, Professor Fu. Do you want to share your screen?
我来分享一下。
Okay.
Mm. 看一下目前是正常的吧？
可以的。
好的，那非常高兴用这样一个机会来做这样一个分享应该说这个是对于我们整个大会来讲，实际上是一个我们的一个彩蛋哈。这个在下一个阶段会有我的关于设计未来的这样一个发言。那么这个分享呢本身也是就是回应了当下的一个服务设计产业的一个发展以及整个社会的这么一个转型那当前呢中国已经进入到这个服务经济的这样一个时代。那么从国家的政策方面从2014年开始陆续推出了非常多的来促进产业和服务设计发展的这样的一些文件。那我们也非常这个高兴的这个经历了今年的服贸大会还有我们的服务设计的第3届的这样一个大会在北京的召开。那服务设计的这个发展呢如果从上世纪80年代到现在呢应该说是经历了一个非常大的快速的这样一个增长。在中国呢应该说是在最近几年取得了非常长足的这样一个进步。那在今天呢会跟大家介绍一下我们的服务设计蓝皮书的一个正式的版本相关的内容因为今天的时间有限只是做一个简要的介绍。那么服务设计蓝皮书的编撰呢应该说是从19年我们就开始进行。那么今年呢疫情期间3月份我们发布了一个先导版。那么这个月呢我们将提供一个我们的正式的版本。那这个版本呢相对于先导的这个版本我们增加了
Comparing with the previous version, we added the contents about the domestic and overseas development, statistical education, its application and the challenges and the future for service industry. And we have increased the content on academic design and its application. We also conducted a survey, including the literature survey, literature study home and abroad, and we have formed, we have come up with the SPAR map. We can see that the service design related papers are increasing. We can see that the trend is similar both internationally and nationally. You can see the trend of the service design industry, and it is on the rise, but still there is further room for improvement. If you can see the screen, you can see there are the keywords such as innovation and cooperation and the project. From 1991 to 2000, the concept of service design was released, and in 2001 to 2010, it was the experience of experiments, and from 2011 to 2020, there has been the process of transformation. We further increased the case studies of service industry, service design, especially against the background of this pandemic. We have added the content about public services. We have about almost 200 case studies of service design. We can see the possibilities that may brought about by the service design, and we analyzed the influence of service design about the sectors that it covers. It includes smart city, education, real estate, finance, real estate, transportation, pension, retirement, Medicare, tourism, and restaurant culture, entertainment, etc., etc. The development of service design has demonstrated the following features: is more holistic, deeper, and more coordinated. About its holism, in the early stage, it focused on the output of the service. And nowadays we see many companies and businesses introduce the service design at a very early stage of their project. From the moment the project is confirmed to the whole process of the project, design is the core driver of the project. And secondly, more coordinated. This is a trend of service design. The designers, the clients are invited to participate in the design, and from outside to inside. In the past, the service design were outsourced to the designing companies, and now they also have some in-house activities and in-house organizational structure related to the service design. And this is more than service, and it is reflected in their organizational change. About education, the curriculum design, both from China and from other parts of the world, including Europe and America, we see that these international universities have curriculums about service design, and we also conducted analysis of the proportions of the service design among the whole schedule of the semester. And we also conducted analysis of the students who are in this field, and those who majored in design, service design, and not majored in service design. And we see that the focus of the students are on the application and the values of service design in business, in public affairs, in government affairs, and they hope that the service design can find its way to China. And we also see that with the further development of service industry, we've already seen the opportunities. Those students who learned service design from international universities have very good opportunities in terms of employment and development. And on another hand, They need to have insights, empathy, communication skill, systemic thinking skill, and integrated abilities. They need to be innovative. They need to have the leadership. They need to have the ability of visualization, cooperation. They need to have business acumen. They need to have the ability to tell very good stories. And with the service design, they can convey their values, including the teachers. They need to have the ability of strategic thinking, strategic and systemic design, and the sustainable thinking, etc. After the release of the first version, we conducted a number of visits. We have listed the colleges and universities and schools that we visited, and those are the major players in the field of service design, including the experts and the professors. About the recommendations of further promoting service design from the perspective of the government in the field of social governance and public services, the introduction of service design can further improve the quality of services, and we want to establish the mutual benefiting society. Just as Mr. Yang said that we need to have the mutual benefiting society with the participation of all the stakeholders, and also city as service. On one hand, it has technological support. On the other hand, the city can be a brand, and we are going to promote this concept at our China-Italy Design Innovation Hub. For the enterprises, they need to have resilient thinking and the contingency plans. In face of the emergency, they can be flexible and resilient about the plan for the future, including the scenario planning. And these are very important abilities, especially in light of the pandemic we are facing nowadays. The enterprises need to be ready at all time, and they need to bring down the barriers across the departments, and they need to have the human-centered philosophy in their business. And about the universities, on one hand, they need to enhance the transdisciplinary innovation abilities. This is the very important cornerstone of service design. On the other hand, they need to have a more flexible way of cultivating talents and integrate the university with research institutes and the enterprises. And the universities and experts and the leaders in the industry need to work together to build the resource the pool, and including the resources for courses and case studies. We are developing the syllabus for the courses of the service design. It will help the universities in the education of service design. The participants are from universities both at home and abroad. We also have the participation of the doctorate candidates. This blue paper is initiated by the China-Italy Innovation Design hub, and CSDC Service Design Community provided us with a lot of support so that we can have this final version of the report. This is a brief introduction of this blue paper. Later on, we are going to release this blue paper online. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Professor Fu. And okay. And welcome everybody to following the development of the Service Design Blue Book. So now this is the end of the first half of today's agenda. At 19:30 Beijing time, we will continue the second half of the speech. Welcome to continue to watch. And this is the official WeChat account of the organizer of this conference, China-Italy Design Innovation Hub. Welcome to follow. So see you later. Let's have a ride. Bye-bye.
你好，你好，夏老师。
哎，好，宋老师你好。
哎，夏老师，我系统就不。
Any questions you can ask me.